Welcome to The City Girl and the Country Choir. Chapter 1. Holly Fitzgerald had always thought in crescendos. Her life was a meticulously planned, soaring movement, building inexorably toward a grand, impossible high C, the Milan debut. At 28, she was not merely a singer. She was a vessel for perfection, a soprano whose control and power had earned her the coveted contract with Scala. Her manager, the perpetually slick and anxious Julian Thorne, had her schedule mapped out for the next 5 years, a glittering transatlantic tapestry of roles, galas, and magazine covers. The air she breathed in her sleek Manhattan apartment felt charged with potential energy, a vibration that promised global acclaim. Then, the silence hit. It began as a small, insidious tickle, a dryness in the throat that she dismissed as pre-performance nerves. It escalated during a strenuous rehearsal of La Traviata in late October, culminating not in the triumphant final flourish of Sempre Libera, but in a shocking, painful collapse of sound. The notes simply ceased to exist. In the sterile, fluorescent lighting of the specialist's office, the diagnosis was delivered like a death sentence: acute vocal cord edema, a severe strain requiring mandatory total vocal rest, 6 weeks, minimum, no speaking, no whispering, no singing. The risk of permanent damage was too high. The grand, soaring movement of her life had been violently truncated, replaced by a deafening, terrifying hold note. Julian was apoplectic. He paced her hospital room, his designer shoes clicking on the linoleum, a human storm cloud of panic and contract clauses. "Holly, this is unacceptable. Milan in 3 months? We have millions riding on this. We need to tell the press something. Food poisoning as sudden crisis of faith? We can't let them know you're broken." His choice of word, broken, echoed in the silence of the room, a cruel, accurate descriptor of her fragile state. Holly, communicating only through a tiny laminated whiteboard, scrawled furiously, "I need silence. Absolute. Find me a cave. No press, no calls, no opera." Julian, seeing the genuine, desperate fear in her eyes, finally relented. He selected the most remote, technology-unfriendly location he could find that still had reliable plumbing and heat: Snow Creek, Vermont. It was described as a rustic retreat, nestled deep in the Green Mountains, a place where cell service was rumored to be sporadic, and the nearest city was a 2-hour drive. Julian secured her a room in a small, privately run B&B called The Hearthside, under a false name, of course, Eleanor Vance, a novelist seeking solitude. The drive from New York was brutal, introspective journey. As the towering skyscrapers gave way to rolling, forested hills and finally deep, snow-dusted valleys, Holly felt a physical peeling away of her identity. Her Italian leather boots, her tailored cashmere coat, her city-sharp features, they felt alien against the backdrop of untouched wilderness and the first heavy snow of early December. She arrived in Snow Creek at dusk. It wasn't a town, really. It was a postcard. A single snow-covered lane lined with buildings that looked lifted from a Dickens novel. A general store with a sagging porch, a squat stone church with a steeple that looked like it was listing slightly, and finally, the Hearthside. The B&B was everything Julian had promised: rustic and then some. It smelled sweetly of burning hickory, cinnamon, and damp wool. The interior was a riot of mismatched antique furniture, hand-stitched quilts, and aggressive floral wallpaper. Before she could even set down her ridiculously expensive suitcase, she was intercepted by the proprietor, Mrs. Mabel Gable. Mabel Gable was a woman who was less walked around than she was experienced. She was round, rosy, and possessed an energy that could power a small grid. Her eyes, magnified by thick glasses, missed nothing. Eleanor Vance, is it? Mabel boomed, her voice resonating in the cozy hall. You're late, dear. And look at you, freezing. Come, come, the kettle's on. I put you in the Aspen room. Good light for your writing, and the heater's a bit temperamental, but it's nothing a good thick quilt can't solve. Now, I hope you're not one of those city folks who expects silence. We're a very musical town this time of year. Holly managed a strained smile and pointed to her throat, then scribbled on her pad. Vocal rest. Doctor's orders. Cannot speak. Mabel's brow furrowed in sympathy, instantly dialing back her volume to a resonant alto. Oh, bless your heart, Eleanor. 6 weeks, you say? Well, we'll take good care of you. Silence is a hard master, especially around Christmas, but we'll manage. We'll just have to communicate the old-fashioned way. She tapped Holly's small whiteboard. Holly was ushered up the creaking, carpeted stairs. The Aspen room was cozy but small, the twin bed swallowed by a mountainous quilt. She unpacked her sleek, black performance dresses next to a collection of crocheted doilies and miniature wooden bears. The conjunction was jarring, almost comical. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room pressing down on her. Outside, the only sound was the gentle, continuous whisper of the falling snow and the distant, muffled sound of a single church bell. Milan felt a million miles away. It felt like a dream that had been ripped from her memory. Her fear wasn't just about her career, it was existential. Without her voice, who was Holly Fitzgerald? She wasn't just a soprano, she was the soprano. Now she was Eleanor Vance, a silent, solitary ghost haunting a rustic B&B. She stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe shallowly to avoid coughing. The terror of her own fragility was a cold knot in her stomach. She had come to Snow Creek seeking silence, but what she found was an overwhelming, echoing emptiness. The expectation of a triumphant return to the world stage was now a crushing, unreachable weight, and the simplicity of this remote town felt less like a refuge and more like a foreign, demanding planet. She was adrift, silent, and desperately alone. The first act of her intended life was over. The second, entirely unplanned, was about to begin. The subsequent week passed in a blur of forced inactivity and profound contrast. Holly, or Eleanor Vance, found the deliberate slowness of Snow Creek both agonizing and strangely soothing. In New York, every second was a currency, a measure of rehearsal time, networking opportunities, or fitness metrics. Here, times stretched, elastic and slow, governed only by the rhythm of the sunrise, the B&B's breakfast schedule, and the endless snowfall. Her main occupation became observation. She would sit by the bay window in the downstairs parlor of the hearthside, nursing a cup of herbal tea. Mabel insisted on a vile, custom-mixed concoction of ginger and honey, and watch the townspeople. They moved with a casual certainty she envied. They didn't rush, they progressed. Every interaction seemed to involve lingering at the general store counter for a chat or a shouted greeting across the snowy lane. This simplicity was the antithesis of the opera world's cutthroat competitive energy. Mabel Gable, meanwhile, was relentless in her nonverbal mothering. She would appear with fresh-baked cookies, a new book, or an extra blanket, offering silent encouragement. Mabel was the town's central nervous system, and Holly quickly learned that nothing in Snow Creek happened without Mabel's approval, or at least her detailed knowledge. She had already deduced that Eleanor Vance was not writing much, instead spending her days staring at the phone, muted, of course, and occasionally weeping silently into her heirloom pillow. One snowy afternoon, Holly ventured out for a mandated walk. The air was frigid but clean, smelling of pine and wood smoke. She walked past the stone church, St. Jude's, whose slightly listing steeple she now recognized as a quirky landmark rather than a structural fault. A crude, hand-painted sign taped to the oak door read, "Annual Christmas Pageant Choir Practice, 7 p.m. Sound terrible? Feel wonderful." As she passed a large, rustic workshop set back from the road, a place that smelled powerfully of sawdust, linseed oil, and something spicy like cinnamon bark, a figure emerged. He was tall, dressed in well-worn flannel and denim, with dark, wind-swept hair and hands that looked large and capable. He was hauling a load of freshly cut firewood, his movements economical and strong. He glanced up, catching her eye, and offered a shy, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his warm, hazel eyes. He was handsome in a rugged, utterly unstudied way that was a world away from the tailored elegance of the tenors he usually encountered. He had the easy grace of a man perfectly comfortable in his own skin and environment. Holly felt a sudden, wholly unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. She averted her gaze quickly, pulling her scarf higher, and hurried on. This, she realized, was her first sighting of Ethan Hayes, though she didn't yet know his name. That evening, the moment of truth arrived. Mabel Gable appeared in Holly's room just after dinner, balancing a tray with tea and an air of determined optimism. She settled on the edge of the bed and pulled out a worn, spiral-bound notebook and a pen. "Eleanor," Mabel wrote, her handwriting sprawling and confident, "I know you need your rest. I respect that. But the truth is, we have a crisis, and you have a gift. I'm not asking you to sing. I'm asking you to lead." Holly took the pen and wrote quickly, "Absolutely not. I am a patient, not a conductor. I cannot speak." Mabel took the notebook back, unperturbed. "It's the pageant," she wrote, circling the words. "Our longtime choir director, Agnes, broke her hip slipping on the ice. She's in recovery. The pageant is the lifeblood of Snow Creek, Eleanor. It's what brings everyone together. But without Agnes, we are rudderless. And to be honest," Mabel paused for dramatic effect, then scribbled a self-deprecating aside, "we sound like a flock of distressed crows trying to escape a banjo." Holly couldn't help but smile, a silent, unwilling twitch of amusement. Mabel continued, pleading now, "You don't have to speak. You can use your hands. You can use your eyes. You can write your instructions. Just a few weeks. Think of it as a creative outlet, a project to distract you from whatever brought you here. I saw you looking at the church earlier. That's a sign, dear, a sign from St. Jude himself." Holly hesitated. She thought of Julian, of the 6 weeks of enforced silence. She could spend that time staring at a wall, or she could spend it channeling her lifetime of musical training into something. The thought of shaping sound, even someone else's sound, held a strange appeal. It was a connection to her art that didn't require her fragile cords. But the sheer rusticity of it all, the thought of coaching untrained amateurs through Silent Night, felt like a professional degradation. Her career was Milan, not Vermont. Mabel saw the internal battle playing out on Holly's face. She wrote one last sentence, pressing the book into Holly's hands. "The only way to heal is to give. Just come observe tomorrow night. If you still hate it, I promise I won't ask again." Holly stared at the words. Give. Give what? Her time? Her expertise? Her peace? She sighed, a deep, silent exhalation of defeat, and nodded once. Mabel Gable's face instantly lit up like the town Christmas tree. She gathered her tray and hurried toward the door, turning only to whisper, "Oh, and Holly, be prepared for the tenor. He's dedicated." Holly frowned, taking the pen to ask about the tenor, but Mabel was already gone, her footsteps thumping a cheerful rhythm down the stairs. Holly lay back on the quilt, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling from the firelight outside. She had just agreed to conduct a terrible country choir during her mandatory vocal recovery. It was professional suicide, pure absurdity, and possibly the most intriguing thing that had happened to her since the doctor's visit. The crushing weight of Milan debut eased just a fraction, replaced by the lighter, stranger pressure of managing a chorus of distressed crows. She wondered if the handsome woodworker from the lane was the aforementioned dedicated tenor. The thought, for the first time in weeks, made her look forward to the morning. The next evening, Holly walked the short distance to St. Jude's, the crisp snow crunching under her feet. The church looked even more charming in the glow of the few lanterns strung along the path, its rough-hewn stone walls radiating a comforting antiquity. The warmth inside was immediate, a heavy, humid air filled with the scent of old hymn books, beeswax, and a faint, slightly alarming odor that she soon identified as freshly varnished wood. The choir practice room was a small, dusty hall off the main sanctuary, dominated by a battered upright piano and a collection of folding chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. There were about 15 people gathered, spanning all ages, dressed in a delightful mismatch of woolen sweaters and sensible boots. Their faces were open, their smiles genuine, their enthusiasm palpable. And then they sang. Mabel Gable's description, distressed crows trying to escape a banjo, turned out to be a gross understatement. They were attempting "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," and the result was less a heavenly chorus and more a chaotic collision of sound. The choir practice room was a small, dusty hall off the main sanctuary, dominated by a battered upright piano. The handsome woodworker, Ethan Hayes, was sitting in the tenor section, slightly hunched over his sheet music, trying earnestly to modulate his voice against the onslaught of the basses. Mabel, who was trying to play the accompaniment, stopped abruptly, slapping the lid of the piano. "Well, that was spirited. But dear, we are all over the place. Now let's try it again. Slower this time. Follow Ethan now. Ethan, your lead." The handsome woodworker Ethan Hayes straightened up. He had the same open, easy posture Holly had noted yesterday. He nodded, cleared his throat, and began to sing the opening line. "Hark, the herald angels sing." And the world shifted. Ethan's voice was quite simply magnificent. It wasn't the trained, polished, technically perfect instrument Holly was used to. It was warm, rich, and raw, a voice that sounded like fine oak aged in a mountain cellar. It had texture and weight, and a naturally resonant baritonal quality that climbed into the tenor range with an effortless, sun-drenched brightness. His pitch was perfect, his musicality instinctive. He sang with a deep sincerity that bypassed technique and went straight to the heart. He was the anchor, the single source of melodic integrity in the entire chaotic room. The rest of the choir, following his lead, managed a passable, if still slightly ragged, second attempt. Holly stared. Here was a voice, a true voice, wasted on amateur hour. It was a diamond hidden in a dusty, dilapidated mine. Her professional instinct, which had been dormant for weeks, snapped awake. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to work. She wanted to peel away the rust and help that tenor shine. After the disastrous, yet heartwarming rehearsal ended, the members dispersed, exchanging cheerful, self-deprecating remarks about their vocal prowess. Ethan Hayes approached Holly, a tentative look in his eyes. He carried the easygoing confidence of a man who builds things with his hands, coupled with the shyness of someone uncomfortable with the spotlight. "You must be Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice as warm as his singing, a low, smooth rumble. Mabel told us you were resting your voice. I'm Ethan Hayes. Welcome to Snow Creek, and to our enthusiastic sound." Holly pulled out her whiteboard and wrote, "Your voice is remarkable. The rest of you are a glorious train wreck." Ethan laughed, a genuine, deep sound that made her smile widen. "You have a gift for blunt assessment, Eleanor. Mabel says you're here to observe. What's the verdict?" Holly wrote, "The technique is non-existent. The rhythm is optional, but the heart is enormous. And the potential is huge, especially yours." She pointed directly at him. He blushed slightly. "Thank you. It's just for fun, really. The pageant is about community, not Carnegie Hall." Holly seized the moment. She flipped the board and wrote a single, definitive sentence. "I accept, but we do this my way, starting tomorrow. No more optional rhythm." Ethan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement and skepticism in his eyes. "Your way? I'm afraid my way involves making sure Mrs. Higgins doesn't fall off the top C and take out the second row basses. Are you sure you're up for a challenge this rustic?" Holly nodded firmly, pointing to the sign on the door. "Sound terrible, feel wonderful." She wrote beneath it, "We will sound beautiful and feel glorious." Mabel, who had been hovering, clapped her hands silently, her eyes shining with triumph. "See, Eleanor, I told you, St. Jude sent us a miracle worker," she mouthed silently. The next morning, Holly woke with purpose for the first time since her vocal trauma. Her internal clock, usually set for grueling early morning vocal warm-ups and exercises, was now dedicated to creating a militant 6-week plan for a country choir. She spent the entire day reviewing their motley sheet music, a collection of well-worn Christmas standards, and rewriting arrangements, simplifying complex harmonies for the altos, but strategically adding layers to showcase Ethan's phenomenal tenor range. She was no longer the broken soprano of Milan. She was Eleanor Vance, taskmaster, conductor, and reluctant savior of the Snow Creek Christmas pageant. As she worked, she noticed the knot of fear in her stomach had loosened. The silence was still there, but it was no longer an emptiness. It was a canvas, and the beautiful, rough voice of Ethan Hayes was the first compelling brushstroke. She knew this was a detour, but suddenly, the destination didn't matter as much as the drive. Chapter 4. Holly's first official choir practice was less a rehearsal and more an orchestral battlefield. She arrived at St. Jude's armed with fresh copies of music, color-coded sections, and a portable dry erase board that served as her primary, silent medium of command. Her strategy was simple: apply the rigor of operatic preparation to the simplicity of Christmas carols. She started with breathing exercises that looked like synchronized swimming and demanded they hold notes for agonizing, precise counts, correcting intonation with the grim intensity of a drill sergeant. The choir, who were used to Agnes's genial, just sing loudly approach, were bewildered, then rebellious. Holly would write on the board, "Basses, your entrance on measure 14 is late and muddy. Use your diaphragm, not your throat. Think the note before you sing." One of the bearded lumberjack basses, Jedediah, scratched his head. "Beg your pardon, Eleanor, ma'am, but my diaphragm is busy holding in my lunchtime stew. We just kind of sing what we feel, you know? It's all about the joy." Holly scribbled back, her handwriting sharp with frustration. "Joy without technique is noise. Technique is structure. Structure allows for perfect joy." The main resistance, however, came from Ethan Hayes. He wasn't overtly defiant, but his quiet, grounded opposition was more challenging to counter. He would sing the section perfectly, but then pause to help a struggling alto, explaining the note not through Holly's complex technical terms, but by relating it to a sound they knew: the whistle of the kettle, the bell of the church. The tension peaked during a particularly grueling sight-reading session. Holly had introduced a tricky four-part harmony arrangement of O Holy Night, a piece far too advanced for their current skill level. When they failed to hold the tricky, chromatic shift in the second verse for the 5th time, Holly slammed her palm on the dry erase board. She grabbed a marker and wrote, "This is unacceptable. We are aiming for beauty, not mediocrity. You are all singing like you do not care." The room went silent. Ethan stood up, his gaze steady and serious, meeting her intense, frustrated glare. He wasn't smiling. "That's not fair, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We care more than you know. We're not trying to earn a contract here. We're trying to make music for our neighbors. This pageant is for the single mother who needs a moment of peace, for the old farmer who can't get out of his house, for the kids who believe in magic. It's heart-first music. Your way, it feels cold. It feels like we're failing a test, not singing a prayer." "It's about respecting the music," Holly wrote back instantly, her hand shaking slightly. "You have the voice of an angel, and you treat it like a party trick. If you have this much talent, you have a professional responsibility to use it." Ethan shook his head. "My responsibility is to Snow Creek. My talent is a tool to connect, not to climb. Maybe that's the difference between a city girl and a country boy." The argument was sharp and public, a clash between the hyper-professional world of Milan and the heart-based simplicity of Snow Creek. The other choir members watched in stunned silence, a mirror of the two opposing musical philosophies. Just as the atmosphere became suffocatingly tense, a sound began outside, a soft, relentless shushing that rapidly grew into a roar. The lights in the hall flickered violently, then plunged the room into darkness. A heavy, immediate silence fell, broken only by the howl of the wind. "Well, shoot," Jedediah muttered. "That's a nasty one. We've lost power, folks. Looks like we're snowed in." Mabel, ever the hostess, immediately began issuing instructions. "Jedediah, you and Hank check the generator. Ethan, fire up the wood stove in the kitchen and see if we can find the emergency lanterns. Everyone else, grab a quilt and settle by the windows. Looks like we're having an unscheduled lock-in." Ethan, before heading toward the kitchen, paused by Holly. He reached out and gently took her marker from her hand. His expression was soft now, the anger gone, replaced by a deep compassion. He wrote on the notebook, "My way or your way. Right now, the only way is warm and safe. Come help me make some tea." Holly, still trembling slightly from the confrontation, stared at his firm, kind handwriting. He wasn't asking her to abandon her principles, but to momentarily prioritize a more fundamental reality: human connection and physical safety. She nodded, setting aside her dry erase board, her heart still beating a rapid, angry rhythm. In the small, warmly glowing kitchen, bathed in the yellow light of an oil lantern and the heat of the old stove, they found a strange truce. Ethan started melting snow for water, while Holly, unable to speak, began assembling the ingredients for tea and Mabel's emergency shortbread. "You really think it's just noise, don't you?" Ethan asked, his voice low as the wind rattled the window panes. Holly shook her head and pointed to his notebook. She wrote, "No, your voice is not noise, it is pure. But the others, they need the structure to find that purity. I teach them the structure so they can sing from the heart without collapsing the foundation." He watched her write, considering her words. "You just want them to stand up straight," he summarized, a slow smile returning to his face. "You want them to respect the art." She nodded emphatically. "I want the world to hear what I hear in them." "Why are you so afraid of mediocrity, Eleanor? What happens if you fail? Who are you if you can't be perfect?" The question was a seismic shock. It was the question she'd been running from her entire life. She stared at the empty space on the notebook. She couldn't answer. She couldn't even whisper the truth. "I am nothing if I can't be Holly Fitzgerald, the soprano." Instead, she snatched the notebook and wrote, "It is not about me. It is about Milan, and perfection is the only shield against the silence." She knew she had revealed too much. Milan was a city, not a project. Ethan didn't pry. He just covered her hand with his own, his palm rough and warm, a grounding weight. Snow Creek isn't Milan, Eleanor. Here, perfection is optional, but heart is mandatory. Let's try to meet in the middle. I'll make sure they stand up straight. You make sure they don't forget to breathe. He squeezed her hand gently. Truce? Holly looked at his kind, earnest face, the lantern light catching the gold flecks in his eyes. She nodded silently, a small, fragile agreement. The snow continued to fall outside, sealing them in a cozy bubble of conflict, compromise, and the faint, promising scent of melting snow and brewing tea. The clash of worlds had ended not with a victory, but with a necessary, intimate truce. Chapter 5. The truce, forged in the cozy glow of the lantern, transformed the rehearsals. Holly, accepting that she couldn't turn a community choir into the Metropolitan Opera Chorus in 6 weeks, softened her approach. She used her technical knowledge not to dismantle their enthusiasm, but to refine it. She focused on basic, universally applicable elements: pitch, breath control, and unified vowels. She even started teaching them the Italian pronunciation for certain phrases, to their enormous, giddy amusement. In turn, the choir embraced her. They learned to anticipate her silent commands, translating her sharp, precise hand movements into musical action. They began affectionately calling her the maestro and brought her small gifts: a tiny wooden carving from Jedediah, homemade elderberry jam from Dorothy, and a rotating schedule of bizarrely flavored teas from Mabel. The most significant change, however, was in her collaboration with Ethan. He became her indispensable intermediary, translating her high-level, complex instructions into Snow Creek common sense. When Holly wrote, "Sopranos, you need a brighter, more focused chiaroscuro on your high F," Ethan would say, "Dorothy, think of the sound of the first bell on Christmas morning, clear and shiny, not foggy." The result was instant, palpable improvement. During these collaboration sessions, often spent huddled over the piano after everyone else had left, Holly grew intimately familiar with Ethan's voice, and by extension, his character. She would work him through scales and exercises designed to extend his already impressive range. She discovered he had a perfect, effortless legato and a passaggio, the tricky transition point between registers that was nearly flawless. He didn't just sing the notes, he inhabited them. One evening, while running a complicated counter-melody line for his solo in The First Noel, Holly scribbled a question. "Where did you learn to sing?" Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans. "My mom. She ran the choir before Agnes. She taught me to listen to the birds, to the river, to the sound of the saw cutting through wood. She said music is just texture, and that the best texture is always honest. And then I just sang in church, really." He paused, looking down at the keys. "You, though, where did you learn that?" He pointed to her technique, the sheer force of her technical knowledge. That kind of knowledge, that precision, that's not a church choir. Holly felt a jolt of panic. She was Eleanor Vance, the novelist. She quickly wrote a deflection. "Years of studying music theory. I was obsessed with opera and classical structure." Ethan didn't look convinced. "Theory, yes, but that passion. When you point your finger, it's not just a signal, it's a demand. You live this. You live every note. You're not just a teacher, Eleanor. You're a conductor who should be conducting an orchestra, or a singer who should be performing." The intrigue was mounting. Ethan was too perceptive, too grounded to be easily fooled. "Why the silence?" he asked gently, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a warm, conspiratorial murmur. "Is it really just rest, or is it running?" Holly wrote, avoiding his eyes. "Rest. Doctor's orders. but her hand trembled slightly. Ethan let it drop, but his eyes told her he didn't believe her. He stood up, stretching. "It's late. You want to come see my shop? I need to finish sanding the church's new podium. That's where the other varnished smell comes from, by the way. I've been working on it between practices." Holly nodded, eager for a distraction. The workshop, the one she'd passed days ago, was a haven of organized chaos. Tools hung neatly from pegboards, sawdust covered the floor in a fine golden dust, and the air was rich with the scent of pine and cherrywood. The nearly finished pulpit sat proudly in the center, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. "This is incredible, Ethan," Holly wrote, running her hand along the smooth, curved wood. "It's just wood," he said, shrugging, but clearly pleased. "It's like music. You listen to the grain, you respect the flow, and you find the beauty that's already there. You don't impose your will, you guide it." As he talked, he picked up a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a wren, and began polishing it with a piece of cloth. His hands, large and capable, moved with a surprising, gentle delicacy. It was a physical manifestation of his singing, power tempered by tenderness. "I found this in the attic of the B&B, he explained, holding it up. "It belonged to the old lady who ran the place before Mabel's family. I'm fixing the wing. Everything can be mended, Eleanor. Sometimes it just takes time and a gentle hand." Holly felt a sudden, profound resonance with the little wooden wren. She took her notebook and wrote, her emotions spilling onto the page. "I feel like that wren. Broken wing. Scared to fly again." Ethan set the bird down and looked at her, his expression radiating understanding. He didn't offer empty platitudes or professional advice. He simply walked over to a small, dusty record player in the corner, put on a crackling vinyl recording, and the room was filled with the melancholy, rich sound of an old Italian tenor. It wasn't opera. It was a simple, heartbreaking folk song. "That's Caruso," he whispered, his eyes on her. He had a voice that could shake walls, but in the end, all anyone remembered was the feeling. "Just feel, Eleanor. Don't worry about the flying. Just feel the music." He stood close to her, the warm scent of sawdust and his flannel shirt surrounding her. The quiet intimacy of the moment, the shared music, the open vulnerability of her admission, it stripped away her defenses. I felt her meticulously constructed persona crumble slightly. I was Holly, not Eleanor, and I was terrified. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, then lowered it, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The simple, nonverbal gesture was charged with a deep, careful respect that was more intimate than any embrace. The unspoken truth of her identity, the Milan contract, the career, the injury, hung heavy and dangerous in the warm air of the workshop. An essential part of her that was now only known by him. The suspense wasn't about the choir anymore. It was about the secret and the undeniable connection forming between the city girl and the country tenor. The integration of Holly's technique and the choir's heart began yielding genuinely beautiful results. The difference was astonishing. The basses, while still booming, were now reliably on pitch. Dorothy's sopranos hit their high notes with a newfound clarity, and the collective sound was rich, unified, and utterly joyous. They had indeed reached the goal, sounding beautiful and feeling glorious. Holly's silent commands had become a form of music in themselves, her hands conducting not just notes, but the emotions beneath them. Holly, in turn, began to shed her city shell. She learned the rhythms of Snow Creek life. She helped Mabel decorate the hearthside with pine boughs and twinkling fairy lights, enjoying the tactile simplicity of it. She even joined the town's annual tradition of decorating the enormous blue spruce in the center of the square, wrapped in a threadbare, oversized sweater that Mabel insisted she borrow. The cold air, the scent of pine needles, and the cheerful, slightly off-key singing of the townspeople as they worked felt more grounding than any applause ever had. Ethan was always nearby, not hovering, but present. He was the one stringing the lights that were too high or stabilizing the ladder for the elderly Mr. Henderson. He had an innate ability to anticipate need without being asked. Holly realized he was the quiet soul of the town, not just musically, but structurally. He built things, fixed things, and anchored people. Their interactions grew less formal and more intimate. Post-mortem rehearsals often extended into shared, silent walks through the snowy woods or extended sessions in the church until the late hours. They communicated mostly through shared glances, the universal language of music, and the occasional scribbled note. One Friday evening, after a particularly successful rehearsal where the choir managed a near-perfect run-through of the entire program, Ethan caught her just as she was bundling up to leave. "Maestro," he murmured, his breath clouding in the cold air. "I just finished a fresh batch of my mom's special hot chocolate mix. It's legendary. My shop is warmer than your room. Would you join me for a non-verbal tasting?" Holly's heart fluttered. It was an invitation that felt deliberately non-committal, yet deeply personal, an almost date. She smiled and wrote quickly, "Only if you promise no mandatory sight reading." "Only mandatory sugar," he countered, leading her not back toward the hearthside, but down the lane toward his workshop. Inside, the fire in the small wood stove was roaring, casting a warm orange glow on the tools, and the scent of the wood was intoxicating. Ethan poured the hot chocolate into 2 thick ceramic mugs. It was rich, dark, and utterly decadent, laced with cayenne and perhaps a hint of cardamom. They sat on a worn wooden bench, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the low, distant howl of the wind. Holly took a sip and closed her eyes in genuine appreciation. She reached for her notebook and wrote, "This is better than any champagne I've ever had." "That," he said, his voice soft with satisfaction, "is a high compliment from a city girl who probably thinks the only way to drink anything is out of crystal." They talked, or rather, Ethan talked, and Holly wrote. He told her about growing up in Snow Creek, about his family history as woodworkers, and how he never felt the pull to leave. "The mountains are my audience. The wood is my score," he said, simply. "I like building something that lasts, something tangible. Like this choir, maybe, or a great piece of furniture." Holly, feeling the comfort of the space and the warmth of his presence, opened up, cautiously. She wrote about the pressure of the opera world, the endless cycle of auditions and critiques, the expectation of being perfect at all times. "It eats you alive, Ethan. You stop singing for joy and you start singing to maintain the pedestal. The higher you climb, the colder the air gets." He nodded slowly, understanding pooling in his eyes. And then the silence became mandatory. The silence forced you off the pedestal and sent you here, where the air is full of snow and cardamom. She smiled, but it was sad. "It's terrifying, Ethan. I don't know if I can ever sing again, not without the fear. What if I open my mouth and nothing comes out? Or worse, what if what comes out is less than perfect?" He reached across the space between them and gently took the marker from her hand, setting the notebook aside. He didn't write. He spoke, his voice quiet, intense, and utterly honest. "I don't know a thing about opera, Eleanor, but I know that voice is part of your soul. A soul doesn't heal by being forced into a box. It heals by being loved, and it heals by singing the right note at the right time, even if it's only one note. You brought beauty back to this town, and you did it with silence. That takes courage I can't even imagine." He leaned in, the scent of sawdust and fresh wood surrounding her. His face was close, his eyes focused entirely on hers. The unspoken energy between them, the shared secrets, the musical understanding, and the magnetic pull was suddenly too strong to ignore. The air crackled with a gentle, terrifying expectation. Holly held her breath, unable to move, unable to speak. Her entire world narrowed down to the warmth of the fire and the intensity of his gaze. She saw in his eyes not the adoring fanaticism of an opera critic, but genuine care and deep, quiet admiration for her, the woman behind the voice. She wanted to tell him everything: her real name, the Milan contract, the crushing stakes, but her words were locked behind her silent vow. Instead, Ethan leaned the last few inches, and his lips brushed hers in a kiss that was tentative, soft, and heartbreakingly sincere. It wasn't a passionate Hollywood kiss. It was a simple, grounding connection, a shared note of harmony in the silent room. It was the first kiss of true love, honest, quiet, and deeply felt. He pulled back, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Just feel," he murmured, echoing his earlier advice. "And don't worry about the flying." The moment was perfect, fragile, and utterly exposed. Then, a sharp, insistent ringing cut through the workshop's peaceful atmosphere. Holly jumped, grabbing her phone. It was Julian, her manager, calling for their weekly, obligatory check-in. His name, glittering and cold, flashed on the screen, a glaring reminder of the high-stakes, competitive life she had fled. The warmth of the hot chocolate and the sincerity of the kiss vanished, replaced by a sudden chill of dread. The silence was broken, and the intrusion of the outside world, of Julian and Milan, had never felt so dangerous or so wrong. Chapter 7. The near exposure in Ethan's workshop left Holly rattled. The fear of Julian uncovering her whereabouts, and more pressingly, the fear of losing the fragile, beautiful connection she'd found with Ethan, weighed heavily on her. She knew she couldn't maintain the pretense of Eleanor Vance much longer, especially given the rising intensity of her feelings for the handsome tenor. The physical strain of the past weeks had also begun to take its toll. She was weeks into vocal rest, and while she desperately wanted to test her chords, the doctor's warning was a constant, terrifying echo. She needed to know if the silence had healed her, or if her greatest fear, a permanently compromised voice, was now her reality. During the next rehearsal, Holly was running Ethan through his main solo for the pageant, a demanding, emotional rendition of "I'll Be Home for Christmas," arranged to allow his tenor to soar. They were alone in the church. Ethan sang the first verse flawlessly, his voice pouring warmth into the empty sanctuary. "Your breath control is magnificent," Holly wrote. "Now try the transition on the word only. Don't push the volume, let the texture carry it. Listen to me." Driven by instinct and a sudden, reckless courage, Holly forgot her silence. She opened her mouth, and with the utmost care, she matched Ethan's final, lingering note, providing a soft, controlled harmony that drifted above his voice. It was only one note, a high, delicate, perfect A-flat. It was barely a breath, but it was pure. The note held for a brief, glorious second, then snapped. The sudden, sharp pain felt like a tiny electric shock in her throat, followed by a dry, rasping cough. Holly clapped her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and immediate, paralyzing terror. She wasn't just in pain, she felt the familiar knot of fear tighten, suffocating her. Her voice hadn't fully recovered. The fragility was still there, the failure still possible. Ethan stopped singing instantly. He was by her side in a flash, his hand gentle but firm on her back, his expression deeply concerned. "Eleanor, what happened? You shouldn't have done that." Holly was shaking, fighting back tears. She desperately grabbed her pad and scribbled, her handwriting frantic. "It's still broken. It's still weak. I ruined it. I ruined everything." No, you didn't," Ethan insisted, pulling her into a protective embrace right there on the church pew. His warmth was grounding, his strength a steady anchor against her panic. It's not ruined. It's just healing. You push too hard, too fast. It's like a bone. You can't run a marathon the day after the cast comes off." He waited until her breathing settled, then pulled back slightly, looking directly into her eyes. He gently took the marker from her and wrote, his letters firm and clear. "Who are you? Tell me the truth. You are not a writer. You are an opera singer. Milan. What happened?" The moment had arrived. She couldn't hide anymore. Holly took the marker, took a deep, silent breath, and wrote her confession, her true identity finally spilling onto the page. "My name is Holly Fitzgerald. I am a soprano. I was supposed to debut at La Scala in Milan in January. I had a major vocal trauma, a strained cord. The doctor ordered absolute silence for 6 weeks. If I push it, I risk permanent damage. I risked it just now. Julian, my manager, sent me here to hide until I heal. This choir, it was just a distraction. I came here a professional. I am leaving a failure." She handed him the notebook, her eyes shut tight, bracing for the inevitable judgment, the shock, the realization that he'd been dealing with a fraud. He read the confession, his face unreadable for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a gentle, relieved smile, the one you give someone they finally admit something they've been agonizing over. "Holly Fitzgerald," he said, tasting her real name, letting it settle in the silent air. He wrote back, his response startling in its simplicity. "Welcome to Snow Creek, Holly Fitzgerald. Thank you for trusting me." He tapped the last line of her confession. "I am leaving a failure." He looked at her and shook his head firmly. "You're wrong, Holly," he said, taking her hand. "Failure is refusing to try. You found the courage to sing one perfect note, even knowing the risk. That's not failure. That's why you're here. The Milan debut, that's an expectation. It's a gilded cage. You're here to find the peace of just being, the peace of that one perfect A-flat." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. "It's not about the career or the stage or the city anymore. It's about now. You've made a terrible choir sound beautiful. You've decorated a Christmas tree, and you've let a local woodworker kiss you. You are finding your peace right here, and your voice is going to heal, Holly, because you are singing from the right place now, from the heart, not the fear." Holly looked at him, feeling the heavy weight of her secret finally lift. She felt lighter, more whole, and profoundly loved. The courage to admit the truth had brought not disaster, but an unexpected, deep peace. He leaned in again, and this time the kiss was more assured, a deliberate declaration of affection and support. Their true love deepened in the quiet sanctuary, sanctified by the sound of her single, imperfectly brave note. Just as the kiss ended, the front door of the church creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air. A familiar, expensive leather shoe tapped nervously on the stone floor. Holly Fitzgerald, darling, thank God. I knew Eleanor Vance was a ridiculous cover." Julian Thorne, her manager, stood in the doorway, a panicked, predatory look in his eyes, his expensive city coat completely inadequate for the Snow Creek cult. He had tracked her down. The outside world had finally breached the walls of her sanctuary. The peace of the confession was immediately replaced by the sharp, dangerous intrigue of the arrival. Chapter 8. Julian Thorne's arrival was like a discordant blast of urban cynicism in the quiet, harmonious haven of St. Jude's Church. He marched down the aisle, shedding snowflakes and anxiety, his eyes fixed only on Holly. "Holly, what in God's name are you doing?" he demanded, ignoring Ethan completely. "This is disgraceful. I tracked your payment information to this ludicrously named B&B. We have an investor meeting in 2 days, and I need a definitive date for your return to physical training. You cannot spend your recovery moonlighting as a conductor for a rural amateur group." Holly, still speechless and utterly exposed, looked at Ethan. Ethan, who was usually quiet and reserved, stepped forward, placing a solid, protective hand on Holly's arm. "She's recovering," he said, his voice calm, steady, and utterly unimpressed by Julian's tailored suit and frantic energy. "And she's not moonlighting, she's volunteering. You must be Julian." Julian finally took notice of Ethan, giving him a swift, dismissive appraisal. "And you are the local distraction, I presume. Look, farm boy, this woman is a valuable asset, $1 million voice. She is contracted to one of the most prestigious opera houses in the world. She needs sterile silence, not amateur dramatics and wood chips." Julian turned back to Holly, his voice lowering into a conspiratorial, almost desperate plea. "Holly, please, I know you're scared about the voice, but this place is beneath you. It's an embarrassment. I've already had to lie to the press about a discreet artistic retreat. If anyone finds out you're running a Christmas pageant with these people, your credibility will be shot. You'll be a laughingstock, Holly. Come with me. We'll leave tonight. I booked a chopper to the nearest airport." Holly shook her head, frantically writing on her pad, "No, I'm staying for the pageant. My voice is still fragile. I need more time." "More time?" he scoffed, snatching the pad. "You're not resting, you're regressing. You risked your recovery for one note. You think these people understand the stakes? They think a sore throat is a tragedy. They don't know that if you fail, I fail, and your career is over. You're letting them drag you down into their simple mediocrity." Holly felt the sting of his words, the cruel accuracy of his assessment of the two worlds. She looked at Julian, seeing the stark reality of her old life, the pressure, the fear, the professional ruthlessness. Then she looked at Ethan, standing firm, his posture radiating quiet conviction. Ethan stepped closer to Julian, his height and calm presence suddenly intimidating. Her voice is healing here because she is happy here. She is surrounded by people who care about her, not about her box office sales. If you don't respect her space, you can leave, now. Julian sneered. "Or what, you'll hit me with a church hymn?" He pulled out his phone. "Fine, you want to stay for your little pageant? I'll give you a reason to leave." He started scrolling rapidly. "I happen to have a few friends in the National Arts column. A quick leak about La Scala soprano plays dress-up in rural Vermont might ruin the pageant and your career simultaneously. But I don't want to hurt you, Holly. Just come home, now." This was the suspense, the intrusion of the high-stakes intrigue she thought she'd escaped. Julian was threatening not just her career, but the very peace and joy she had found in Snow Creek. He was threatening the entire town's cherished Christmas event. Holly reached out and put her hand on Ethan's arm, a silent plea for protection and strength. She then took the notebook and wrote, her hands steady now, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "Julian, I am not Eleanor Vance. I am Holly Fitzgerald. I will not be blackmailed. If you publish that story, you ruin my career, but you also destroy our trust. I will not go back to Milan with you. I will not trust you again. You can wait until after the pageant, or you can leave right now and never call me again. Your choice." She held the notebook up, forcing him to read the words. Julian stared at her. The calm, defiant woman in the wool sweater was not the high-strung, nervous client he knew. He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with a stone-cold intensity. He knew he was beaten, at least for the moment. The threat was a last-ditch effort, and it had failed. With a final, disgusted sigh, he shoved his phone back into his pocket. "Fine. 2 days. The chopper is booked for 2 days after Christmas. But if you fail, if your voice cracks, if you ruin your reputation on this amateur hour, I am washing my hands of you, Holly, and Milan will never call again." He cast a venomous look at Ethan.
"Don't get too comfortable, farm boy. This is temporary. She belongs on a stage, not in a stable." Julian turned and stormed out, the door slamming shut, leaving a swirling vortex of snow and cold air in his wake. Holly sank onto the pew, trembling, the courage leaving her as quickly as it had come. She had made a choice, and the cost could be her entire future. Ethan sat beside her and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "He's wrong, Holly. You belong exactly where you want to be, and you just showed more courage than any diva I've ever heard of. You stood up to the expectation. That's a beautiful note." He picked up her pad and wrote, with a gentle command. "No more fear. Nav a pageant to save, and a duet to practice. I need you. The choir needs you. Snow Creek needs Holly Fitzgerald." Holly looked at his words, at the warmth of his eyes, and the truth of the small town that had embraced her brokenness. She squeezed his hand. She had traded the expectation of Milan for the truth of Snow Creek, and in that trade she realized she had won. Her voice might be fragile, but her resolve, fueled by true love and a newfound peace, was finally unbreakable.
Chapter 9. The confrontation with Julian was the turning point, the dramatic fortissimo that cleared the air. Holly had chosen Snow Creek, choosing the quiet potential of true love and peace over the glittering certainty of professional expectation. The relief of her confession and Julian's temporary departure allowed her to focus completely on the task at hand, preparing the choir for their biggest night. At the next rehearsal, Holly, now known to everyone as Holly, arrived with a new air of determined joy. She was still silent, but her body language was lighter, more confident. She set up her dry erase board, and instead of starting with drills, she wrote a single sentence in bold letters. "I am Holly. Thank you for making me feel at home." The choir erupted in silent applause and warm smiles, led by Mabel's enormous, beaming face. The fear that Julian had tried to instill, that she would be exposed and ridiculed, was proven baseless. They knew her secret, and they embraced her for it. The community's unconditional love was a powerful antidote to the opera world's conditional approval. Holly introduced her master plan for the pageant's finale. Instead of a simple closing hymn, she had reworked the traditional Ave Maria for two voices, accompanied only by the church's small, antique organ. She wrote the instructions. "This is the core of our concert. This piece is technically difficult. We are not simplifying it. We will use all the technique we have learned, but we will sing it with the heart of Snow Creek." The piece was clearly designed as a spotlight for the two most gifted voices, Holly's soprano and Ethan's tenor. She had been secretly working on the sheet music, transposing her part so that her notes were high and delicate, requiring extreme control and minimal volume, a vocal strategy that protected her chords while still allowing her artistry to shine. The challenge was immediate and intense. The piece was complex, full of intertwining, soaring lines. They spent the entire rehearsal working through the duet. Since Holly could not speak, their communication was entirely nonverbal, a graceful, intricate dance of musicianship. Holly would point to her chest for better breath support, gesture with her hand for a softer attack on a phrase, or close her eyes to signal a shared emotional connection. Ethan understood her perfectly. He didn't just listen to the notes, he listened to the silence around her notes, anticipating her phrasing, her breathing, her intent. Their voices, now harmonizing on the page, were a physical manifestation of their growing true love. His rich, grounding tenor provided a stable foundation, allowing her delicate soprano line to float above it without strain. During a break, while Ethan was tuning a church instrument, Mabel approached Holly, holding a mug of tea. She didn't write, she just whispered softly. "You look different, dear. Peaceful. Did you deal with that terrible man?"
Holly nodded, taking the pad and writing, "I chose the choir over the contract. He can't hurt me here, but the voice is still a risk." Mabel smiled knowingly. "The voice will follow the heart, Holly. Now, about this duet. I heard the parts you wrote. It is beautiful, professional, and entirely too much. Are you sure you're up for the final note? It's awfully high for your condition." Holly wrote back, "I can do it, with Ethan's support. We sing from the heart, but we rely on the structure. That is the lesson. And the risk is worth the beauty." The final rehearsal was a triumph. The choir, unified in purpose and sound, sounded more like a chamber chorus than the flock of crows of 6 weeks ago. But the real magic happened when Holly and Ethan performed the Ave Maria duet. As Ethan's warm tenor established the melody, Holly's voice, a high, controlled ribbon of silver sound, entered. It was breathtaking. The entire choir stopped what they were doing to listen. Holly wasn't singing with the powerhouse volume of a diva. She was singing with the pure, expressive control of an artist who had rediscovered the preciousness of her gift. Her phrasing was exquisite, and the vulnerability in her sound added an emotional layer that Milan might have polished out. As they reached the final high note, Holly held it, perfectly pitched, floating effortlessly above Ethan's grounding harmony. It was a note of courage, a note of healing, and a silent declaration of love. When the final chord faded into the quiet air of the sanctuary, the choir erupted in genuine, heartfelt applause. Jedediah, the burly bass, wiped a tear from his eye. Holly, that was like hearing a snow angel sing. That's the one. That's the heart-first music." Ethan looked at Holly, his eyes shining with pride and love. He didn't need to write or speak. The music had said everything. They had found their ultimate harmony, not just professionally, but personally. Holly knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had made the right choice. Milan was a contract. Snow Creek was home. The pageant was now more than a distraction. It was the final, triumphant affirmation of her new life and the beginning of her true love story with Ethan. All that remained was the performance, the final test of her recovered voice and her courageous heart.
Chapter 9. The confrontation with Julian was the turning point, the dramatic fortissimo that cleared the air. Holly had chosen Snow Creek, choosing the quiet potential of true love and peace over the glittering certainty of professional expectation. The relief of her confession and Julian's temporary departure allowed her to focus completely on the task at hand, preparing the choir for their biggest night. At the next rehearsal, Holly, now known to everyone as Holly, arrived with a new air of determined joy. She was still silent, but her body language was lighter, more confident. She set up her dry erase board, and instead of starting with drills, she wrote a single sentence in bold letters. "I am Holly. Thank you for making me feel at home." The choir erupted in silent applause and warm smiles, led by Mabel's enormous, beaming face. The fear that Julian had tried to instill, that she would be exposed and ridiculed, was proven baseless. They knew her secret, and they embraced her for it. The community's unconditional love was a powerful antidote to the opera world's conditional approval. Holly introduced her master plan for the pageant's finale. Instead of a simple closing hymn, she had reworked the traditional Ave Maria for 2 voices, accompanied only by the church's small, antique organ. She wrote the instructions. "This is the core of our concert. This piece is technically difficult. We are not simplifying it. We will use all the technique we have learned, but we will sing it with the heart of Snow Creek." The piece was clearly designed as a spotlight for the 2 most gifted voices, Holly's soprano and Ethan's tenor. She had been secretly working on the sheet music,
transposing her part so that her notes were high and delicate, requiring extreme control and minimal volume, a vocal strategy that protected her chords while still allowing her artistry to shine. The challenge was immediate and intense. The piece was complex, full of intertwining, soaring lines. They spent the entire rehearsal working through the duet. Since Holly could not speak, their communication was entirely nonverbal, a graceful, intricate dance of musicianship. Holly would point to her chest for better breath support, gesture with her hand for a softer attack on a phrase, or close her eyes to signal a shared emotional connection. Ethan understood her perfectly. He didn't just listen to the notes, he listened to the silence around her notes, anticipating her phrasing, her breathing, her intent. Their voices, now harmonizing on the page, were a physical manifestation of their growing true love. His rich, grounding tenor provided a stable foundation, allowing her delicate soprano line to float above it without strain. During a break, while Ethan was tuning a church instrument, Mabel approached Holly, holding a mug of tea. She didn't write, she just whispered softly. "You look different, dear. Peaceful. Did you deal with that terrible man?" Holly nodded, taking the pad and writing, "I chose the choir over the contract. He can't hurt me here, but the voice is still a risk." Mabel smiled knowingly. "The voice will follow the heart, Holly. Now, about this duet. I heard the parts you wrote. It is beautiful, professional, and entirely too much. Are you sure you're up for the final note? It's awfully high for your condition." Holly wrote back, "I can do it, with Ethan's support. We sing from the heart, but we rely on the structure. That is the lesson. And the risk is worth the beauty." The final rehearsal was a triumph. The choir, unified in purpose and sound, sounded more like a chamber chorus than the flock of crows of 6 weeks ago. But the real magic happened when Holly and Ethan performed the Ave Maria duet. As Ethan's warm tenor established the melody, Holly's voice, a high, controlled ribbon of silver sound, entered. It was breathtaking. The entire choir stopped what they were doing to listen. Holly wasn't singing with the powerhouse volume of a diva. She was singing with the pure, expressive control of an artist who had rediscovered the preciousness of her gift. Her phrasing was exquisite, and the vulnerability in her sound added an emotional layer that Milan might have polished out. As they reached the final high note, Holly held it, perfectly pitched, floating effortlessly above Ethan's grounding harmony. It was a note of courage, a note of healing, and a silent declaration of love. When the final chord faded into the quiet air of the sanctuary, the choir erupted in genuine, heartfelt applause. Jedediah, the burly bass, wiped a tear from his eye. Holly, that was like hearing a snow angel sing. That's the one. That's the heart-first music." Ethan looked at Holly, his eyes shining with pride and love. He didn't need to write or speak. The music had said everything. They had found their ultimate harmony, not just professionally, but personally. Holly knew then, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had made the right choice. Milan was a contract. Snow Creek was home. The pageant was now more than a distraction. It was the final, triumphant affirmation of her new life and the beginning of her true love story with Ethan. All that remained was the performance, the final test of her recovered voice and her courageous heart.
Chapter 11. The interior of St. Jude's was a stunning, rustic portrait of Christmas. The old stone walls were draped with evergreen garlands, and the rough-hewn beams were strung with tiny, warm white lights. The scent of pine and burning beeswax mingled in the air, illuminated by the soft, flickering light of candles placed in every window. The pews were packed with the entire population of Snow Creek, their faces glowing with anticipation. Holly, seated beside Ethan on the choir platform, felt an intense wave of calm wash over her. Gone was the debilitating, self-critical terror of the professional stage. Here, the audience was comprised not of critics and managers, but of friends who were simply hoping for a moment of shared joy. The pageant began. The choir, with their newfound confidence and technique, performed brilliantly. Dorothy's sopranos were clear, Jedediah's basses were grounded, and the collective sound was rich, layered, and utterly sincere. They sang the carols Holly had painstakingly arranged, blending the sophisticated structure she demanded with the exuberant heart they provided. Each song was met with warm, appreciative applause. Holly conducted with a quiet, joyful energy, her hands shaping the music with an easy grace that had become second nature. Finally, Mabel stepped forward to announce the finale. And now for a very special gift. Our conductor, the wonderful Holly Fitzgerald, has prepared a duet with our very own Ethan Hayes. This piece is a symbol of the harmony she has brought to our town. Ethan on the organ and Holly on the vocals. A hush fell over the crowd. Ethan walked to the antique organ, his expression serious but reassuring. Holly walked to the center of the platform. She looked out at the sea of friendly faces, and then her gaze settled on Ethan's warm, steady eyes. She didn't sing to Milan. She sang to him. Ethan began the introduction, a simple, resonant swell of organ music. The first notes of the Ave Maria filled the air. Ethan's tenor entered, rich and grounded, establishing the melody with a profound, quiet sincerity. His voice was the bedrock, the home. Then it was Holly's turn. She took a deep, controlled breath, using all the technique she had recovered, and her voice, a pure, silver thread of sound, rose effortlessly. It wasn't the powerful, wall-shaking voice of a superstar diva. It was something far more beautiful. The voice of a soul that had been broken and was now mended by love and peace. Her high notes were delicate, controlled, and utterly crystalline, a perfect, fragile sound that conveyed enormous emotional weight. As their two voices intertwined, their harmony became the very definition of true love. Ethan's strength gave Holly the courage to soar, and Holly's delicacy brought an elegant vulnerability to Ethan's robust sound. It was the heart-first music, backed by perfect structure. When they reached the climax, the demanding final phrase, Holly let her voice ascend to the high note. She held it, not with force, but with absolute control and a clarity that was astonishing. There was no tremor, no catch, no fear, only pure, sustained beauty. She held the note, suspended in the silence, and then descended gently, meeting Ethan's final, perfect chord. When the music finally faded, there was a stunned, tearful silence, and then the church erupted in a joyous standing ovation. People weren't just clapping. They were crying, cheering, and celebrating not just a beautiful performance, but the beautiful journey of the quiet city girl who had found her way home. Holly looked at Ethan, her eyes shining with tears of relief and overwhelming joy. She had done it. Her voice was healed, not just physically, but spiritually. She hadn't left a failure. She had performed a triumph of the heart. After the pageant, the town flowed into the church hall for a community celebration. Everyone congratulated them, but Holly only had eyes for Ethan. He found her standing by the massive, glowing Christmas tree. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. It was a gift he had made. Holly unwrapped it to find a small, exquisitely carved music box made from a piece of fine polished maple. The lid was engraved with a tiny, delicate depiction of a wren in flight.
When she opened it, it played a simple, resonant rendition of their Ave Maria duet. For the maestro who taught us all how to fly, and for the woman who has finally found her song. Ethan, she whispered back, her voice a soft, low texture used for the first time in weeks. It was fragile, but strong enough. I love you. Thank you for making me sing again. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, joyous Christmas kiss under the lights of the tree, the sound of their friends' laughter, and the gentle music of the box swirling around them. The expectation of Milan was over. The truth of Snow Creek had won.
Chapter 12. The day after Christmas was quiet, blanketed by a fresh snowfall that sparkled under a bright, crisp sun. Holly woke up in the hearthside, no longer Holly Fitzgerald, the soprano preparing for La Scala, but Holly, the woman who had found her peace in Snow Creek. She was scheduled to leave the following morning. Julian's private charter plane was still booked, a last, lingering thread of her old life. She found Ethan in the parlor, stoking the fire. He smiled as she descended the stairs. "Morning, maestro. Your voice sounds clear today." "It does," she said softly, testing the texture of her recovered voice. It was still sensitive, but it was hers again. "And it sounds like I should be talking to you about the future." "I concur," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the window where they could watch the snow fall. Just then, her phone rang. It was Julian. Holly excused herself, taking the call by the window. "Holly, listen, I've done some damage control." Julian's voice was clipped and professional. "I managed to spin the pageant as a highly conceptual performance art piece, focusing on the dichotomy of high and low art. It was ridiculous, but the press bought it. Now, the La Scala director has offered a compromise. You can debut in the secondary role next season, but you must leave immediately. Come to New York and commit to a year of nonstop training and PR." Holly listened to the offer, the professional future, the validation, the climb back up the ladder. It was everything she had once wanted. She looked out at the quiet, snowy lane, at the listing steeple of St. Jude's, and at the kind, patient man waiting for her by the fire. "Julian," she said, her voice soft but firm, the perfect resolution of her highest and lowest notes. "Thank you, but I regretfully decline. I'm not coming back to New York, and I'm not taking the contract." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Holly, are you serious? You're giving up your entire career for a few weeks of rustic charm? For a man who builds wooden birds?" "I'm not giving up my career, Julian," she corrected gently. "I'm redefining it. I've found a voice I prefer. A voice for peace, not pressure. I wish you the best. Goodbye." She hung up and placed the phone on the mantel, silencing the last echo of her old life. Ethan was already smiling. I assume he wasn't calling to wish us a Merry Christmas. He was offering me a secondary role in Milan, and I turned it down. "Good," he said, simply, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Because Snow Creek is offering you a lead role, the lead role in my life." They stood there for a long moment, simply breathing the shared air. Holly finally pulled back, her eyes shining. "But what does that look like, Ethan? I'm an opera singer. You're a woodworker. How do our lives fit together?" "We build something new," he said, practical nature taking over. "I have something to show you." He bundled her up, and they walked out, not toward his bustling workshop, but to a smaller, older cabin tucked behind the church, overlooking the wooded valley. It was a beautiful, slightly dilapidated building, but the chimney was smoking. He opened the door.
Inside, the cabin was warm, filled with light, and empty, save for a small, perfectly tuned piano and a comfortable chaise lounge. The walls were acoustically treated, and the air was clean and dry. "I finished this yesterday," he explained, his voice full of pride. "It used to be the old church music room, but it was just storage. I repaired the roof, insulated the walls, and put in that piano. It's for you, not just for your own practice, but to teach. Holly, there are a dozen young kids in this town, including little Timmy Henderson, who have raw, beautiful voices. You can train them. You can bring the world of music to Snow Creek on your terms. You can find your stage right here." Holly was overwhelmed. He hadn't just accepted her, he had built a life for her, a life that perfectly integrated her professional passion with her newfound desire for simplicity and peace. He had given her a way to keep her art without the toxicity of the pressure. "A studio," she whispered, walking to the piano and running her fingers over the keys. "My own music room, my own stage. And when you need a tenor, I am always available. We can sing for our friends, for our children someday, and for the sheer joy of it. Heart first, remember?" Holly turned in his arms, her eyes shining with the certainty of her choice. "I love you, Ethan Hayes. More than Milan, more than the applause, more than the high C. I love you, Holly Fitzgerald, more than the perfect wood grain, more than the silence of the forest. You brought music back to my life." He kissed her, a long, deep kiss that was the joyful culmination of their journey. It was a kiss that sealed their unconventional, perfect future, a future where the high art of the city girl met the honest heart of the country tenor. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the small town into a magical, cozy haven, the only stage either of them would ever need. They had found their ultimate peace, their ultimate courage, and their beautiful, enduring true love in the simplest of places.
And that's the end of Holly and Ethan's journey, the story of finding your true voice and the love that was always waiting in Snow Creek. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. If this story brought a smile to your face or made you believe in a little Christmas magic, please take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Hit the like button, tell me your favorite moment in the comments below, and share this video with someone who needs a good holiday romance. We truly appreciate every single one of you. See you in the next one.